It was a meeting that would change everything inside the grand walls of Downton Abbey. Two people from different worlds, both proud, both strong in their own way, were about to stand face to face for the very first time. Lady Mary, the daughter of an old aristocratic family, had grown up surrounded by privilege, elegance, and expectations. Matthew Crawley, a young lawyer from the city, was new to this world of titles and tradition. Their paths were never meant to cross, and yet fate brought them together. In that single moment, when Mary first looked at Matthew, and Matthew first spoke to Mary, the seeds of one of the most complicated and unforgettable relationships in Downton Abbey's history were planted. This is not just a story about two people meeting. It is about the clash between the old world and the new, between pride and possibility, between the life Mary knew and the change Matthew represented. The House of Downton stood tall and proud, its stone walls carrying the weight of generations. Inside, the Crawley family lived under rules shaped by time and tradition. But outside those walls, the world was changing. The news of the Titanic's sinking had shaken not only the family but also their future. The heir who was meant to carry the family name forward was gone, and with his death came uncertainty. For Lady Mary, the eldest daughter, this tragedy was more than just loss. It was a threat to her place in the world she had always believed was secure. Her role had been clear, her path already drawn, but now everything seemed uncertain. In the midst of this confusion, a new heir was announced. His name was Matthew Crawley, and he was nothing like the man the family expected. A middle-class lawyer, intelligent but practical, Matthew lived far away from the grandeur of Downton. He did not come from a line of lords and ladies, nor did he move in the circles Mary was used to. To him, the idea of inheritance and titles seemed more like a burden than a gift. To Mary, this man felt like an outsider, someone who could never truly belong in the world she had known since childhood. Yet the rules of inheritance were firm, and Matthew was called to Downton. The family prepared to meet him, curious and cautious. For Mary, there was no excitement in this meeting. She was proud, guarded and sharp, determined not to let this stranger unsettle her place in the house. She dressed with care, not out of admiration but out of duty, knowing appearances mattered. Every detail of her look and her manner was a shield, one she would use to face this man who had suddenly stepped into her story. The halls of Downton filled with quiet whispers as the day arrived. Servants moved quickly, preparing rooms, laying tables, and polishing silver, all aware of the importance of the new heir's arrival. Upstairs, the family gathered, each with their own thoughts. Lord Grantham, steady and practical, wanted to welcome Matthew with patience. Lady Cora, kind but cautious, hoped the meeting would ease tensions. Lady Mary, however, held her chin high, already forming her judgment. She did not see Matthew as her equal. To her, he was an intruder, a man stepping into a role that had never been meant for him. But fate does not ask permission. Soon the sound of carriage wheels on gravel echoed through the estate. Matthew had arrived, carrying not only his suitcase but also a new chapter for Downton. He stepped into the grand house, unaware of the storm of emotions waiting for him. Mary, standing at the top of the staircase, prepared herself. This would be the first moment, the first glance, the first exchange between them. And though neither of them knew it yet, this simple meeting was about to spark a story that would define them both. The moment Matthew stepped into Downton Abbey, the air inside the great hall seemed to shift. He paused for just a second, his eyes taking in the high ceilings, the sweeping staircase, the portraits of ancestors gazing down from the walls. This was not the world he had come from. He was used to small rooms lined with books, modest furniture, and the steady rhythm of a lawyer's life in the city. Here, everything felt larger than life, a stage set for people who lived by rules he had never followed. And at the top of that staircase stood Lady Mary. She was still, graceful, her presence commanding the room without a single word. The light from the tall windows caught the edge of her dress, making her seem almost untouchable. She studied Matthew in silence, her expression perfectly composed. For her, this was not just a new guest entering the house. This was the man who now carried a future that had once belonged to someone else, someone she might have called husband, someone she might have shared a destiny with. Matthew looked up and met her eyes. His glance was steady, not bold, but not shy either. He did not bow his head in awe, nor did he step back in hesitation. In that brief moment, Mary noticed something she had not expected. He did not look at her as though she were above him. And he did not look at the house as though it belonged to legends. He looked as if he had every right to be there. That small detail struck her, though she would never admit it out loud. The introductions began. Polite words were spoken, names exchanged. But beneath the surface, something more was taking shape. For Mary, Matthew's manner was puzzling. He was respectful. Yet there was no trace of the nervousness she thought he would show. He did not stumble over his words. He did not glance around the room like a man overwhelmed. He stood with calm confidence, answering questions simply without flattery. To Mary, this almost felt like defiance. As the family gathered around, the conversation flowed, but Mary's eyes never left Matthew. She asked him small questions, her tone smooth, but there was always a sharp edge hidden beneath. Each word was a test. Would he falter? Would he try to please her as so many others did? Yet Matthew replied with ease. He spoke about his work, his life in Manchester, and the way he had built his career with effort rather than inheritance. His words carried no arrogance, only certainty. Mary listened, and though she kept her expression unreadable, her mind was working quickly. This man was not like the others. He did not seem desperate to fit into her world, nor did he act grateful to have been chosen by it. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. For years she had known exactly how to play her role. Dignified, witty, untouchable. But here was someone who refused to bend to the rules of the game. The room seemed filled with quiet tension, though no one else might have noticed. Beneath the polite conversation and the careful manners, something powerful was beginning to form. Not affection, not yet, not even respect, but an energy, a spark of resistance that would draw them closer even as it pushed them apart. For Mary and Matthew, this was no ordinary meeting. This was the start of a struggle neither of them had prepared for. Dinner was set in the grand dining room, candles flickering in silver holders, the long table dressed as if for a royal occasion. The Crawleys understood that every detail mattered. To them, tradition was not just routine, it was power. Matthew, seated among them for the first time, felt the weight of those eyes upon him. The polished silver, the endless courses, the trained servants moving in silence. It was a world meant to impress, perhaps even to intimidate. Yet Matthew did not shrink. He sat upright, his hands steady, his gaze unshaken. Mary watched him closely. Every small gesture fascinated her, though she would never have admitted it to herself. The way he held his fork without ceremony, the way he thanked the servants directly, the way he spoke to her father as though they were equals. It all set him apart. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression smooth but her thoughts racing. She was used to men who flattered, who deferred, who tried to charm her with rehearsed elegance. Matthew, on the other hand, seemed to care very little about winning her favor. That, oddly enough, made him more difficult to ignore. Their first true exchange began almost by chance. Mary asked him, in her calm and deliberate tone, how he felt about inheriting Downton. Her words sounded polite, but there was a sharp edge beneath them, as though she were testing him. Did he understand what it meant to hold such a title? Did he appreciate the weight of history that came with it? Matthew's reply was simple, and yet it unsettled her. He admitted that he had no desire to change who he was. He spoke of his work as a lawyer, of his belief in earning one's way, and of his discomfort at being thrust into a life of privilege he had never asked for. To him, Downton was not a prize to be won, but a responsibility he could neither escape nor fully embrace. Mary tilted her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips, but her eyes remained cool. His words clashed with everything she had been taught. For her, Downton was not just land or walls. It was her family's identity, her legacy, her very existence. How could he speak of it with such detachment? The table grew quiet for a moment. Even Lord Grantham seemed to study his new heir with a mix of pride and concern. But Mary's gaze lingered longest. She found herself irritated by his honesty, yet somewhere deep inside, a flicker of curiosity stirred. This man who dared to speak plainly, who seemed untouched by the grandeur around him, What would he mean for her world, for her future? The rest of the dinner passed with polite words and practiced smiles, but beneath the surface a silent duel had begun. Mary's questions were arrows wrapped in silk, and Matthew's answers were shields forged from conviction. Neither bowed, neither bent. To anyone else, it was nothing more than a courteous evening. But for Mary and Matthew, it was the opening move of a battle of pride, one that neither of them had planned, but both of them had already entered. When the dinner ended and the family retired to the drawing room, Mary carried herself with the same calm elegance she always wore. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly, her face a mask of grace. To anyone watching, she was unshaken, perhaps even unimpressed by the presence of the new heir. She spoke lightly with her mother, answered her grandmother with polished wit, and gave no hint of the storm that quietly moved beneath her surface. But when she left the room and found herself alone, the mask slipped. In the quiet of her chamber, with only the soft glow of a lamp beside her bed, Mary let out the breath she had been holding all evening. She stood before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her, and for the first time she admitted to herself that Matthew Crawley was not what she had expected. She had imagined an awkward man, overawed by the house, eager to impress and easy to dismiss. Instead, she had met someone who seemed to belong without asking permission. Someone who did not flinch when faced with her sharp questions. That unsettled her more than she wished to admit. She tried to brush the thought aside, telling herself he was merely an intruder, a man lucky enough to step into fortune that was never his by right. Yet the truth pressed against her pride. He had looked her in the eye without hesitation. He had spoken with clarity, even when his words clashed with everything she believed. And what disturbed her most was the fact that she could not stop thinking about him now, even when she wished to forget him entirely. For Mary, pride had always been her strongest armor. It shielded her from disappointment, from weakness, from the sharp edges of the world outside. But Matthew's presence threatened to pierce that armor, not with flattery or charm, but with honesty. He had not tried to win her, and perhaps that was why she found herself so unwilling to dismiss him. As she sat by the window, looking out at the dark grounds of Downton, her mind played over every word, every glance of the evening. Her pride told her she should despise him. Her curiosity whispered that she should watch him more closely. The conflict left her restless, caught between disdain and intrigue. She pressed her lips together, straightened her shoulders, and reminded herself of the role she was meant to play. The dutiful daughter, the elegant lady, the pride of the Crawley name. Whatever Matthew Crawley represented, she would not let him disturb the order she had always known. At least, that was what she told herself. What Mary did not see, far away in his guest room, was Matthew staring at the ceiling, thinking of her. Two people, both proud, both unwilling to admit their thoughts, already bound by something neither of them could control. The guest room at Downton Abbey was silent except for the faint crackle of the fire. Matthew sat at the small writing desk, his hands folded, his thoughts heavier than the weight of the room around him. He had faced courtrooms filled with questions. He had argued with men twice his age and twice his pride, but none of that had left him feeling quite like this. Tonight, he had walked into a world that was not his, a world that looked down on him even as it claimed him as its heir. He thought of Lady Mary. Her eyes, sharp as glass, had followed him all evening. Her words had been polished, smooth, almost musical, yet every phrase carried a challenge beneath it. He could sense her testing him, searching for weakness, waiting for him to stumble. But he had not. He had stood as himself, spoken as himself, and still her presence lingered with him now. Not because she had welcomed him, but because she had not. Matthew leaned back in his chair, the shadows playing across his face. He was not a man who sought titles or grand halls. His life in Manchester had been simple, honest, earned by work and effort. He had been content with that, content with knowing who he was and what he had built. But Downton was not content with him being ordinary. This place, this family, expected something else. Something he was not sure he wished to give. Yet in Mary's gaze, he had felt something unexpected. Not acceptance, but not dismissal either. It was as if she had recognized him, truly seen him, even if only to decide she did not approve. That unsettled him more than her words. He was used to people judging him for his work, for his choices, for his plainness. But Mary's judgment carried weight because it was not about the man he had been, but about the man he might become in this strange new role. He rubbed his temples and closed his eyes for a moment. He did not want to think of her, and yet he did. Her voice echoed in his mind, her calm but cutting tone lingering like the aftertaste of strong wine. He reminded himself that this was only the beginning, that he had come to Downton not to win Mary's approval, but to fulfill a duty he had not chosen. And yet beneath the duty, beneath the pride he carried in being himself, he felt the stir of something he could not name. Matthew rose and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Outside, the ground stretched into darkness, the great house standing silent behind him. Somewhere across the hall, Mary too was awake, perhaps staring into the same night. He would never know. But as he stood there, he understood one thing with clarity. Whatever his future at Downton might be, Lady Mary would not be easily avoided. She was already a part of it, and that thought both challenged and strangely compelled him. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Downton Abbey, painting the great halls in pale gold. The house, though alive with servants moving swiftly through their duties, felt calmer than the night before. Matthew descended the staircase slowly, his hand brushing against the carved banister. This time there were no formal introductions, no grand display of wealth and tradition. It was simply morning, and in the stillness he could breathe a little easier. He did not expect to meet Mary there. She appeared at the far end of the hall, walking with measured steps, her figure outlined by the glow of the sun. She had not been dressed by ceremony yet, only by routine. The sharp glamour of the night before was softened now, though her composure remained untouched. For the first time, Matthew saw her not as the poised lady at a grand table, but as a woman simply moving through her home. Their eyes met across the space, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence carried its own weight, heavier than words, as though both were deciding whether to keep their distance or to cross it. Mary was the first to break it, her voice cool yet curious. She asked if he had slept well, her tone casual, though her eyes flickered with something more, an attempt to measure him again, perhaps to see if the house had unsettled him during the night. Matthew smiled faintly, answering that he had slept just fine, though he admitted that the scale of Downton was still something he had not grown used to. His words were plain, but his honesty was disarming. He did not try to charm her, nor did he hide the truth of his unease. Mary raised her chin slightly, her smile faint but edged. To her, Downton was not overwhelming. It was natural, the air she had always breathed. To hear him speak of it as something strange unsettled her pride. And yet, beneath that pride, she found herself listening more closely than she wished. They walked together toward the breakfast room, the quiet echo of their footsteps filling the hall. Their conversation drifted, light on the surface but sharp underneath. Mary asked about his work, his cases in Manchester, and whether he truly believed a man could build his place in the world without the weight of a name behind him. Matthew replied that he had never needed anything more than skill and persistence, and that titles seemed to him a cage more than a crown. Mary's lips curved in the faintest smile, though it was not a smile of agreement. To her, titles were not cages but shields. They held her world together, gave her meaning, gave her security. And yet, as she listened to Matthew speak, she wondered what it might feel like to live as he had lived, to be shaped by effort rather than inheritance. The thought both intrigued and irritated her. As they entered the room, their words paused, but the silence between them spoke louder than conversation. Two people, bound by duty, shaped by different worlds, now stood side by side, neither willing to bend, neither willing to retreat. And though they did not yet know it, every step they took together was drawing them closer into a story that would test their pride, their hearts, and the very meaning of the life they thought they understood. That night, when the house grew quiet once more, the memory of the day lingered in both their minds. Lady Mary sat by her dressing table, her hair loosened, her face softer in the glow of candlelight. She replayed every glance, every reply, every steady look Matthew had given her. She told herself she did not care. that he was only a man who had been pushed into her world by chance. And yet beneath her denial, something restless stirred. He had not bowed to her sharp tongue, nor had he tried to win her approval. He had stood firm, and that firmness both annoyed and fascinated her. Across the corridor, Matthew lay awake in his bed, staring at the shadows moving on the ceiling. He thought of Mary's eyes, sharp yet searching, and the way she carried herself as though the weight of the whole house rested on her shoulders. He admired her strength even as he bristled against her pride. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than beauty that unsettled him. It was her certainty, her refusal to yield, her silent challenge. And though he told himself he had no interest in winning her, he knew their paths were already bound together. The house itself seemed to sense it. Downton, with its grand halls and endless corridors, had witnessed generations of triumph and loss, love and betrayal. Now it watched two people who could not be more different begin a dance of resistance, pride against pride, tradition against change. Lady Mary, the keeper of old ways, and Matthew Crawley, the voice of a new world. Neither would admit what they felt. Not now, not yet. But the seed had been planted, and nothing could stop it from growing. As the candles burned low, the future remained unwritten. But one truth was already clear. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of a battle of hearts, a story that would twist and turn, wound and heal, break and rebuild. And though they could not see it yet, this night marked the start of something far greater than either of them could imagine. The story of Lady Mary and Matthew Crawley had begun, and Downton Abbey would never be the same again.